The blood on her hands was still fresh when she heard the horse approaching, and Hannah Garrett knew she had maybe 60 seconds to live if she stopped digging. The Nevada Territory sun beat down merciless on her back as she clawed at the hardpan earth behind the abandoned mill outside Keeler, California. Her fingernails splitting and bleeding as she tried to uncover what her brother had died for, what they would kill her for if they found her here. The letter tucked inside her bodice said the deed was buried here, the real deed to the Silver Star mine that proved the Kincaid brothers had murdered their way to a fortune. And if she could just get it, if she could just reach it before they came back to finish what they started 3 days ago when they left her brother Samuel face down in the street. But the hoofbeats were closer now, too close, and Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she scraped deeper into the hole she had made, her fingers touching something that felt like oilcloth just as a shadow fell across her. "Well now," a man's voice said, low and dangerous. "That's exactly where we meant to put you." Hannah whirled around, dirt streaking her face, and found herself staring up at a man silhouetted against the brutal afternoon sun. He sat tall in his saddle, a buckskin jacket dusty from travel, dark hair curling just past his collar beneath a weathered hat. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, but his fingers were not wrapped around the grip, not yet. For a moment they just stared at each other, Hannah crouched in her half-dug grave, this stranger looking down at her with eyes she could not quite read in the glare. "Please," Hannah said, her voice cracking from 3 days of hiding without water. "Please, I just need 5 more minutes. They killed my brother, and I can prove it if you just let me." "You are Hannah Garrett," the man interrupted, and it was not a question. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life in a saddle than out of it. Up close she could see his face properly now, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the sharp intelligence in his brown eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He could not have been more than 25, maybe 26. Young for the hardness she saw in him. "How do you know my name?" Hannah demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Because Ross Marlowe makes it his business to know things," he said, moving closer. "And right now, I know that the Kincaid brothers are about 10 minutes behind me, and when they get here they are planning to put a bullet in your head and drop you in that very hole you are digging." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Then, why are you here?" "Did they send you ahead to?" "I am not with them," Ross said sharply. He looked back toward the desert, toward the shimmering heat waves rising off the sand, and Hannah saw tension coil through his shoulders. "I have been tracking them for 6 weeks. They killed a friend of mine in Virginia City, stole $40,000 in mining claims, and now I find out they have been busy here too." His eyes cut back to her, assessing. "Whatever you are looking for, you are out of time to find it." "I cannot leave without this," Hannah said desperately, turning back to the hole and clawing at the oilcloth package she could just barely touch. "My brother died for this. If I do not get it, his death means nothing. The Kincaids will own half of Keeler and no one will ever be able to prove what they did." Ross swore under his breath, a sharp, vicious sound, and then suddenly he was beside her, his hands joining hers in the dirt. His fingers were stronger, steadier, and within seconds he had the package free. It was roughly the size of a book, wrapped in oil-treated canvas and tied with leather cord. "This it?" he asked, already pulling Hannah to her feet with his other hand. "Yes, I think so. I have not." "Then you are coming with me right now," Ross said, and there was no room for argument in his voice. He shoved the package into her hands and practically lifted her toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "I grew up on a ranch," Hannah said, which was answer enough. Ross mounted first and then hauled her up behind him with one strong arm around her waist. She had barely gotten her arms around him before he kicked the horse into motion, wheeling away from the mill at a gallop that made her hold on tight or fall. Behind them she heard shouts, then gunfire, bullets kicking up dust in their wake. Hannah pressed her face against Ross's back, felt the solid warmth of him, the leather smell of his jacket mixing with horse and sweat and the peculiar scent of sagebrush. His body moved with the horse like they were one creature, guiding them between rocks and into a narrow canyon that she would never have seen from the main trail. The shooting faded behind them as they climbed higher into the hills, but Ross did not slow down. They rode for what felt like hours, the sun creeping toward the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of amber and rust. Hannah's arms ached from holding on, her legs cramping from the unfamiliar position, but she did not complain. Every mile between them and the Kincaid brothers was a mile she might live to see tomorrow. Finally, as twilight began to purple the sky, Ross guided the horse into a narrow crevice between two towering rock formations. The space opened up into a small sheltered area, invisible from any approach, with evidence of old campfires and a trickle of water coming down the rock face into a natural basin. "We will stop here tonight," Ross said, dismounting and then helping Hannah down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and his hands steadied her. "They will not find this place in the dark, and come morning we will have options." Hannah nodded, still clutching the oilcloth package against her chest like a talisman. Now that they had stopped moving, now that the immediate terror had faded slightly, she could feel everything catching up with her. The grief for Samuel, the exhaustion from 3 days of hiding and running, the bone-deep fear that had become her constant companion. Her hands started shaking, and once they started, she could not make them stop. Ross took the package gently from her grip and set it aside, then guided her to sit on a smooth boulder. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I do not remember," Hannah admitted. "Before Samuel died. I had some water yesterday from a cattle trough." He shook his head and went to his horse, pulling supplies from his saddlebag with practiced efficiency. Within minutes he had a small fire going, sheltered so the smoke would dissipate before it cleared the rock walls, and was heating coffee in a battered tin pot. He handed her jerky and hardtack, which she ate mechanically, not tasting it, but feeling the food settle her stomach slightly. "Tell me about your brother," Ross said, sitting across the fire from her. The flames painted shadows across his face, making him look older, more weathered. "The Kincaids killed him 3 days ago." Hannah swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak through the tightness in her throat. "Samuel was a surveyor. Honest work, fair work. About 2 months ago he was hired to do a property survey on some mining claims around Keeler, including the Silver Star. When he did the work, he found irregularities. The deed the Kincaid brothers had filed did not match the original land grant, and when he started asking questions, he found out that the real owners had mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago. A family named Chen, Chinese immigrants who struck silver and filed proper claims, gone without a trace. "The Kincaids killed them," Ross said flatly. Samuel thought so. He found evidence, documentation, and he thought he found where the original deed had been hidden. "He sent me a letter, told me if anything happened to him I should look behind the old mill, that he had marked the spot." Hannah's voice broke slightly. 3 days ago he was shot in the street. Sheriff called it a robbery, said Samuel must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I know it was them, and now they want me dead too to tie up loose ends. Ross poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers, calloused and warm, and she found herself noticing details about him she should not have had the presence of mind to notice. The way his shoulders filled out his jacket, the gentle competence in his movements. The fact that he had saved her life without knowing her, without owing her anything. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You said you were tracking them for your own reasons." "I was," Ross agreed. He stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "My friend Jimmy Macklin, we worked together on a ranch up in Nevada before we both saved enough to try our hands at mining. We filed a claim together in Virginia City, nothing huge but decent. Then the Kincaids showed up, said we were on their land, had papers to prove it. Jimmy argued, said our claim was filed first. 2 days later Jimmy was dead, trampled by horses they said, and our claim papers had disappeared from the county office. The Kincaids registered the land in their name and I could not prove otherwise." "I am sorry," Hannah said quietly. Ross shook his head. "Jimmy had a wife and a baby girl. They had to go back to her family in St. Louis with nothing. So I started tracking the Kincaids, finding out everywhere they had been, every claim they had mysteriously acquired, every person who had gotten in their way. There is a pattern, always the same. Forge papers, intimidate, and if that does not work, kill. They have done it from Nevada to California to Arizona Territory and back again. 12 times at least that I can prove. And no one has stopped them. They are careful. Always make it look legal just enough. Always make the deaths look like accidents or robberies. And they have money now, enough to buy off the right people." Ross looked up at her, his expression hard. "But if that package you are holding is what I think it is, maybe we finally have something solid enough to hang them with." Hannah looked down at the oilcloth bundle sitting beside her. With shaking fingers she unwrapped it, the leather cords falling away to reveal a stack of papers protected from the elements. On top was a deed, written in careful Chinese characters with English translation below, granting mining rights to the Chen family for what was now called the Silver Star. Beneath it were survey maps in Samuel's handwriting, showing the discrepancies. And beneath that, a statement signed by 3 witnesses who had seen the Kincaid brothers escorting the Chen family into the desert one night last October. The witnesses had been afraid to come forward, but Samuel had found them, gotten their marks on paper. "This could do it," Ross said, reading over her shoulder. "With this we could go to the federal marshal, maybe even the territorial governor. This is more than suspicion. This is documentation." "Samuel was a good man," Hannah whispered. "He was only 22. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he died because he wanted to do the right thing." Ross reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip firm and grounding. "Then we will make sure it meant something. I promise you that." Hannah looked at him, this stranger who had ridden into her life at the exact moment she needed him, who had his own reasons for vengeance but had chosen to save her anyway. In the firelight he looked both dangerous and protective, a man shaped by hard living but not broken by it. She realized she was still holding his hand and that she did not want to let go. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow we ride for Carson City," Ross said. "It is a 3-day journey, maybe 4 depending on how hard the Kincaids look for us. The federal marshal there is supposed to be honest, and I know a lawyer who owes me a favor. We get this evidence into the right hands and then—" He paused. "Then we hope justice is not as dead in the West as it sometimes seems." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, the desert night bringing a chill that made Hannah shiver despite the flames. Ross noticed and moved around to sit beside her, his body blocking the wind that whistled through the rocks. It was forward, improper, but propriety seemed like a luxury from another lifetime. 3 days ago she had been a respectable schoolteacher in Keeler, living in a neat boarding house, corresponding with Samuel and thinking about maybe going east to visit their aunt in St. Louis. Now she was a fugitive, A woman with dirt under her broken nails and blood on her dress, sitting in an outlaw's hideout with a man she had met hours ago. But when Ross wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, still warm from his body, Hannah felt safer than she had in days. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "I will keep watch." "You need to sleep too," Hannah protested. "I will later. I am used to it." He settled back against the rock, his rifle across his lap, his eyes already scanning the shadows. "Rest, Hannah. Tomorrow will be a hard ride." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Hannah curled up on the hard ground, Ross's jacket wrapped around her, and despite everything, despite the fear and grief and uncertainty, she fell asleep within minutes. She woke sometime before dawn to find Ross adding wood to the fire, his movements quiet and careful. Hannah sat up, her body aching from the hard ground, and he glanced over at her. "Coffee is almost ready," he said. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." He poured her a cup, and she accepted it gratefully, the bitter warmth spreading through her. In the pre-dawn light she could see him more clearly, the tiredness in his eyes, the tension he carried in his shoulders. He had not slept much if at all, she realized. He had spent the night keeping her safe. "Ross," she said carefully, "when this is over, when we have delivered this evidence and the Kincaids are brought to justice, what will you do?" He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I have not thought that far ahead. I have been chasing them for so long I do not know what comes after. You could go back to ranching, or mining, maybe." He stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What about you? Will you go back to Keeler?" Hannah considered this. "I do not think I can. Too many memories now, and too many people who will wonder why I am still alive. Maybe St. Louis, to be with my aunt. Or somewhere new entirely, somewhere no one knows what happened." "That is the problem with running," Ross said quietly. "Eventually, you forget what you are running toward, only what you are running from." They broke camp as the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Ross helped Hannah mount behind him again, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, already more comfortable with the closeness than she should have been. They rode north through terrain that changed from desert scrub to rocky hills to pine forest as they climbed in elevation, following paths that Ross seemed to know by instinct. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat, taking shelter under a stand of juniper trees. Hannah dismounted stiffly, her legs protesting, and Ross handed her more jerky and the last of the hardtack. "There is a town about 2 hours from here called Painted Rock," he said, studying the horizon. "Small place, just a trading post and a few buildings. We can get supplies there, maybe trade for a second horse so we are not riding double." "Is it safe?" "Safer than starving or riding this poor animal into the ground." He patted his horse's neck affectionately. "The Kincaids will not expect us to stop. They will assume we are running flat out for the nearest big city. Sometimes hiding in plain sight is the smartest play." Painted Rock turned out to be even smaller than Ross had suggested. Just a handful of weathered buildings clustered around a spring where the trail crossed. The trading post was run by an old man with 3 teeth and suspicious eyes, but Ross handled him with easy charm, trading some silver coin for supplies and inquiring about a horse without seeming too eager. "Got a mare," the old man said, eyeing Hannah with open curiosity. "Not much to look at, but she is sound. $40. "30, Ross countered. "And you throw in a saddle." They haggled for a few minutes while Hannah waited outside, hyper-aware of every person who glanced her way. But Painted Rock was too small and too isolated to have much news from Keeler yet, and no one paid her much attention beyond the usual curiosity about strangers. Ross emerged with a gray mare that looked like she had seen better days, but had good legs and clear eyes. The saddle was worn but serviceable, and Hannah felt relief wash over her at the prospect of riding on her own, of not being pressed against Ross's back for hours at a time, feeling his heartbeat and breathing in his scent and thinking thoughts that she should not have been thinking. Except that once she was on her own horse, riding alongside him instead of behind him, she found she missed the closeness. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains, and as the sun began to sink, Ross guided them off the main trail again, finding another sheltered spot among the pines. This time they had proper supplies, and Ross put together a real meal over the fire. Beans and bacon, and even some bread from the trading post. "This is good," Hannah said, surprised at how hungry she was, how good simple food could taste when you had been living on fear and jerky. Ross smiled at her, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. "My mother insisted I learn to cook before I left home, said any man who could not feed himself was not worth the space he took up. Smart woman. She was." The past tense hung in the air, and Hannah did not pry. Everyone in the West had ghosts, had stories of loss and hardship. It was the price of living on the edge of civilization. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire again, and Hannah found herself studying Ross in the flickering light. She wondered what his life had been like before Jimmy died, before he took up this quest for justice. Had he laughed more? Had he thought about settling down, finding a wife, building something permanent? Or had he always been a wanderer, a man more comfortable with the horizon than a homestead? "Why are you looking at me like that?" Ross asked, catching her staring. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it is that 3 days ago I did not know you existed, and now you are the only person in the world I trust." The words came out more honest than she had intended, and she saw something shift in Ross's expression. "Trust is a rare thing," he said quietly. "I am glad you give it to me, Hannah. I will not betray it. I know." And she did know with a bone-deep certainty that had no logical basis. Ross Marlowe was a man who kept his word, who followed through, who did what was right even when it was hard. The world needed more men like him. "Tell me about teaching," Ross said, clearly trying to shift the conversation to safer ground. "You said you were a school teacher in Keeler." "For 2 years, Hannah confirmed. "Before that I taught in Sacramento for a year, but it was too big, too crowded for me. I wanted somewhere smaller where I could know my students, really help them. Keeler seemed perfect, small enough to matter, big enough to have a school that needed a teacher." She smiled sadly. "I had 16 students ages 6 to 14, good children for the most part, eager to learn. What will happen to them now that you are gone? The school board will find someone else, I suppose." "There is always someone willing to teach, especially women who need respectable work." Hannah stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers pulse and glow. "I loved it, though. Watching children learn to read, seeing their faces light up when they understood something new. It felt important, like I was building something that would last. Maybe you will teach again, wherever you end up. Maybe." But even as she said it, Hannah wondered if that life was truly gone now, if she could ever go back to the quiet simplicity of spelling lessons and arithmetic drills. She had looked death in the face, had dug in her own grave, had run for her life across the desert. That changed a person, marked them in ways that did not wash off. "What is it like?" she asked. "Tracking men, living on the trail, always moving." Ross was quiet for a long moment. "Lonely," he finally said. "You see a lot of country, but you never really see it, not the way you do when you are building something there. Every town is just a place to pass through, every person just someone who might have information. You start to forget what it feels like to wake up in the same place 2 days in a row, to have people who know your name because you are part of something, not just passing through. He looked at her across the fire. I have been doing this for 6 weeks and I already hate it. I cannot imagine men who live like this for years. Then why do it? Because Jimmy deserves justice. His wife and daughter deserve to know it meant something, his death. Ross's jaw tightened. And because if no one stops men like the Kincaids, they just keep doing it, keep destroying lives. Someone has to stand up. You are a good man, Ross Marlowe, Hannah said softly. I try to be. He stood up, restless energy moving through him. Get some rest. Tomorrow is another long day and we will be climbing higher. The pass into Carson Valley is not easy riding. Hannah wanted to stay up, to keep talking, to learn more about this complicated man who had saved her life. But exhaustion tugged at her again, and she wrapped herself in the blanket Ross had bought at the trading post and lay down by the fire. This time when she fell asleep, she dreamed of her brother Samuel, not the last image of him lying dead in the street, but an older memory of him teaching her to ride when she was 7, and he was 9, patient and encouraging as she clung to the saddle in terror. In the dream he smiled at her and said, "You can do this, Hannah. You are braver than you think." She woke with tears on her cheeks and found Ross watching her with concern. "Bad dream?" he asked gently. "No," Hannah said, wiping her eyes. "A good memory. Sometimes those hurt worse." They rode hard that day, climbing into mountains that still held patches of snow in their shadowed crevices, even though it was late June of 1878. The air grew thinner and cooler, and Hannah found herself grateful for the jacket Ross had bought for her at the trading post. The trail was rough and narrow in places, winding between towering pines and across streams swollen with snowmelt. They were halfway through the pass when Ross suddenly held up a hand, bringing them to a halt. Hannah froze, her heart hammering, and then she heard it too, the sound of horses ahead, multiple horses, coming toward them on the trail. Ross quickly guided them off the path, into a thick stand of pines where the shadows lay heavy. They dismounted and Ross held both horses' muzzles, keeping them quiet as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Through the trees Hannah could make out riders, 4 of them, and her blood ran cold as she recognized the Kincaid brothers in the lead. Jake Kincaid was the older, a thick-set man with a black beard and cruel eyes. His brother Eli was leaner, faster, with the look of a rattlesnake about to strike. Behind them rode 2 men Hannah did not recognize, hired guns by the look of them, hard-faced and heavily armed. "They are heading back toward Keeler," one of the hired guns was saying, his voice carrying in the thin mountain air. "We have been riding north for 2 days and have not seen any sign. Maybe they doubled back." "No," Jake Kincaid said, his voice a low growl. "Marlowe is too smart for that, and the girl has nowhere else to go. They are ahead of us, has to be. We just need to ride harder, catch them before they reach Carson City." "What if they already made it?" Eli asked. "Then we have a different problem," Jake said grimly. "But I am betting they are still on the trail. 1 horse carrying double, they cannot move that fast. We will catch them." The riders passed within 20 feet of where Ross and Hannah hid, and she held her breath until they were gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Only then did Ross release the horses and let out a slow breath. "They will realize their mistake eventually," he said quietly. "When they do not find us ahead, they will turn back and search every inch of this trail. We need to move fast. Can we outrun them?" Hannah asked, hearing the tremor in her voice. "No, but we can outsmart them." Ross was already mounting up, his face set with determination. "There is another trail, an old Paiute path that branches off about a mile ahead. It is rougher and takes longer, but it will bring us out north of Carson City without using the main road. If we take it now, While they are riding south, we might just slip past them." They rode faster than was probably wise on the narrow mountain trail, the horses picking their way over rocks and exposed roots, with Hannah's heart in her throat the whole time. True to his word, Ross found the branch trail, barely more than a game path winding through the forest, and they plunged into it without hesitation. The going was slow and treacherous, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through sections where the path disappeared entirely or became too steep to ride safely. Branches grabbed at Hannah's clothes and hair, and more than once she slipped on loose stones, only Ross's quick hand keeping her from falling. But gradually they descended the far side of the mountains, the forest giving way to scrubland again, and in the distance Hannah could see the valley spreading out below them, green with spring growth and dotted with ranches. "Carson Valley," Ross said, pointing. "We made it." They had made it, but they were both exhausted, the horses nearly spent, and the sun was setting again. Ross found them shelter in an abandoned line shack, probably used by cowboys during spring roundup but empty now. There was even a little hay left for the horses, and a rusty stove that Ross got working with some effort. "Tomorrow we ride into Carson City," he said, heating beans over the stove. "We find the federal marshal, we hand over the evidence, and we let the law do its job." "And if the law does not do its job?" Hannah asked. She had seen too much corruption, too many men in power looking the other way when money was involved. "Then we find another way," Ross said firmly. "But we have to try, Hannah. This is how civilization works. We bring evidence, we tell the truth, and we trust that enough good people will do the right thing." Hannah wanted to believe him, wanted to share his faith in the system. But she had buried her brother 3 days ago because the system had failed him, had let murderers go free because they had money and influence. What made this time different, as if reading her thoughts, Ross came and sat beside her on the rough wooden bench. "I know you are scared," he said quietly. "I am too, if I am honest. But if we do not try, if we just let them win because we are afraid they might get away with it, then what is the point of any of this? Samuel died believing the truth mattered. Your brother deserves better than our giving up before we even try." He was right, damn him. Hannah took a shaky breath and nodded. "Tomorrow, then. We go to the marshal tomorrow." Ross squeezed her hand, his touch warm and solid, and for a moment they just sat there, close enough that Hannah could feel the heat of his body, could see the fine lines around his eyes, could notice the way he looked at her with something more than just concern or partnership. There was something else in his gaze, something that made her breath catch, made her remember that she was a woman and he was a man and they were very much alone. "Ross," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. He leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. Hannah did not tell him to stop. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. Ross made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back, his arms wrapping around her, holding her like she was something precious and breakable and absolutely essential. It was not her first kiss, but it felt like it, felt like the first real kiss, the first one that mattered. Ross kissed like a man who meant it, deep and thorough and hungry, and Hannah responded with equal intensity. 3 days of fear and grief and adrenaline transmuting into desperate need. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, and Ross's hands were shaking as they cupped her face. "We should not," he started, but Hannah cut him off with another kiss. "We should," she said against his lips. "We absolutely should, because I do not know what tomorrow brings, but I know that right now, in this moment, I want you and you want me, and that feels like the only true thing in the world." Ross groaned and kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands sliding into her hair, and Hannah let herself fall into him, into the heat and need and the surprising tenderness beneath the passion. They made love on the rough floor of the lined shack, with moonlight streaming through the gaps in the walls, and it was awkward and uncomfortable and absolutely perfect. Ross was careful with her, attentive, making sure she found pleasure before taking his own, and afterward he held her close, his heart hammering against her back, his breath warm against her neck. "I did not plan for this," he said quietly. "When I rode up and saw you digging, I was not planning to fall for you." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "I did not plan to fall for a stranger who saved my life and upended everything, but here we are." "Here we are," Ross agreed. He kissed her forehead, gentle and sweet. "What are we going to do about it?" "Get through tomorrow first," Hannah said practically. "Then figure out the rest." They dressed and ate the beans Ross had cooked, and then slept wrapped in each other's arms on the hard floor, more comfortable than Hannah would have thought possible. She woke before dawn feeling Ross already awake beside her, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "I have been thinking," he said. "After we deliver the evidence, if things go the way they should and the Kincaids are arrested, we are going to have to testify. It could take weeks, maybe months before there is a trial." "I had not thought that far ahead," Hannah admitted. "The federal marshal will want to keep us somewhere safe, somewhere the Kincaids cannot reach if they make bail or if they have other men working for them. We will probably be moved to different locations, not allowed to communicate much in case someone is watching." Ross paused. "What I am saying is, after today, we might not see each other for a while." The thought hit Hannah like a physical blow. She had known this was temporary, this partnership, this closeness, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way she was not prepared for. "So last night was what, goodbye?" she asked, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. "No," Ross said firmly, turning her to face him. "Last night was me telling you that when this is over, when the trial is done and justice is served, I want to see where this goes. I want to court you properly, Hannah Garrett. I want to take you to dinner and walk you home and maybe, if you will have me, build something that lasts." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind this time. "I would like that," she whispered. "I would like that very much." They rode into Carson City as the sun was climbing toward noon, two dusty riders on tired horses who drew little attention on the busy streets. Carson City was the territorial capital, bustling with commerce and government business, and Ross navigated them through the crowds with the confidence of someone who had been here before. The federal marshal's office was in a solid brick building near the courthouse, and Ross tied the horses outside before helping Hannah dismount. "Ready?" he asked, his hand warm on her back. Hannah clutched the oilcloth package against her chest. "Ready." The federal marshal turned out to be a stern-looking man in his 50s named Coleman, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story without interrupting, his expression growing darker as Ross laid out the pattern of murders and forged claims, as Hannah added her testimony about Samuel's death and the evidence they had found. When they unwrapped the package and showed him the deed, the survey maps, the signed statements, Coleman sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is solid," he said finally. "Damn solid. The Kincaid brothers have been operating in this territory for near 2 years, and we always suspected, but could never prove anything. This changes things." He looked at Ross and Hannah with something like respect. "You two did good work, and you took a hell of a risk to bring this to me." "Can you arrest them?" Hannah asked. "Oh, I can and I will," Coleman said with grim satisfaction. Based on this evidence, I can get warrants for both Kincaids and any known associates for murder, fraud, and theft. The question is finding them before they realize the noose is tightening. They were in the mountains yesterday, Ross said. They were looking for us, trying to stop us from reaching you. They might still be out there searching. Coleman nodded. Then I will send deputies into the hills today, and I will wire every town and outpost within 100 miles. If the Kincaids show their faces anywhere, we will get them. He stood up, offering his hand first to Ross, then to Hannah. You two are heroes, whether you feel like it or not. That evidence is going to put away some very dangerous men. What happens to us now? Hannah asked. Now I put you somewhere safe while we round up the suspects, Coleman said. I have a house I use for witnesses, quiet place on the edge of town with a deputy on guard at all times. You will stay there until the trial, and you will not leave except with escort. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Once the Kincaids are in custody, if they make bail or if we have reason to believe someone is trying to intimidate witnesses, we may move you again, possibly split you up to different locations. He saw Hannah's face and his expression softened slightly. I know it is hard, but it is for your own protection. These men have killed before, and they will not hesitate to kill again to save their necks. So they were taken to a small house at the edge of Carson City, a modest 2-story building with a deputy named Morrison stationed on the front porch. The inside was clean but sparse, 2 bedrooms upstairs and a parlor and kitchen downstairs, with the windows all shuttered against prying eyes. It felt like a prison, even if it was one designed to keep them safe. Separate bedrooms, the marshal said pointedly, and Hannah felt her cheeks heat. Ross just nodded, professional and distant in a way that made Hannah's heart ache slightly. They were back to being strangers, or at least to pretending they were, because the world was watching now. The first 3 days passed slowly, with nothing to do but wait and worry. Morrison brought them newspapers that carried no mention of arrests, and Coleman visited once to tell them that the Kincaids had not been found yet, that his deputies were still searching. Ross paced the small house like a caged animal, his frustration palpable, while Hannah read and reread the same book until she had it memorized. At night, after Morrison had checked the locks and settled on the porch, Ross would slip into Hannah's room and they would lie together in the narrow bed, not making love because the walls were thin and Morrison was just downstairs, but holding each other, whispering plans for the future. Ross talked about a ranch he wanted to buy in Montana Territory, good land with water and timber, a place to build something permanent. Hannah talked about teaching again, maybe starting a school in a new town where no one knew her past. They wove their dreams together in the darkness, and it felt real, felt possible, felt like something worth surviving for. On the 4th day, Coleman came to the house with news written all over his face. Hannah and Ross met him in the parlor, standing close together, and Coleman removed his hat with a satisfied expression. We got them, he said. Both Kincaid brothers and 3 of their associates arrested this morning in a mining camp outside of Virginia City. They are in custody, being transported here under heavy guard. The trial is set for 3 weeks from now. Hannah felt her knees go weak with relief, and Ross steadied her with an arm around her waist. They cannot get out on bail, Ross asked. Not on these charges, Coleman said firmly. Multiple counts of murder with documentation. The judge denied bail entirely. They will sit in cells until the trial and then, God willing, they will hang. It should have felt like victory. But Hannah found herself thinking about all the people the Kincaids had hurt, all the lives they had destroyed, and it just felt hollow. Samuel was still dead. Jimmy Macklin was still dead. The Chen family was still gone. Justice could not bring any of them back. As if reading her thoughts, Ross pulled her closer. "It matters," he said quietly. "I know it does not feel like enough, but it matters." The next 3 weeks were strange, suspended time where Hannah and Ross existed in a bubble, waiting for the trial to start. Coleman visited regularly with updates, and they learned that the evidence they had provided was even more damaging than they had hoped. Other victims had come forward, emboldened by the arrests, with their own stories of intimidation and theft. The case against the Kincaids was solid, and the territorial prosecutor was confident of conviction. Finally, the trial began, and Hannah and Ross were escorted to the courthouse under guard. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, with people spilling out into the hallway. Hannah testified first, her voice shaking but clear as she told the story of Samuel's death, of the evidence he had found, of digging in her own grave when Ross had found her. She looked directly at Jake Kincaid as she spoke, and saw no remorse in his eyes, only cold calculation. Ross testified next, laying out the pattern of crimes, the trail he had followed from Nevada to California and back again. He spoke about Jimmy Macklin, about the fraudulent claim, and his voice never wavered. Other witnesses followed, each adding their piece to the damning mosaic of evidence. The defense tried to discredit them, tried to suggest that the evidence was forged or that the witnesses were lying. But the sheer weight of documentation and testimony was overwhelming. The trial lasted 5 days, and at the end the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Jake and Ali Kincaid were sentenced to hang, along with 2 of their associates. The third associate, who had agreed to testify against the others in exchange for a lesser sentence, would serve 20 years in territorial prison. The Silver Star mine would be returned to the Chen family's heirs, if any could be found, and if not, the proceeds from its sale would go to a victims' fund. Hannah cried when the verdict was read, great shaking sobs of relief and grief mixed together. Ross held her as they left the courthouse, his arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the crowd and the questions shouted by newspaper reporters eager for a story. Coleman met them outside, a rare smile on his weathered face. "It is done," he said simply. "Justice served. You two can go home now, wherever home is." Ross looked at Hannah, his eyes asking a question. She nodded and he turned back to Coleman. "Montana territory," Ross said. "We are going to Montana." They were married 2 weeks later by a circuit judge in a small ceremony with Marshal Coleman and Deputy Morrison as witnesses. Hannah wore a simple dress she had bought with money Coleman had paid them for their time and testimony, and Ross wore a new shirt and had shaved the weeks of stubble from his jaw. They said their vows in the parlor of the safe house that had been their temporary prison, and when Ross kissed her, she felt like her life was finally beginning, like everything before had been prologue. They bought 2 good horses and supplies for the long journey north, and they left Carson City on a clear morning in early August of 1878. The ride to Montana took them 3 weeks, traveling through some of the most beautiful country Hannah had ever seen. High mountain valleys and forests thick with pine, rivers running cold and clear. They camped under the stars most nights, making love in their bedroll and talking until the fire burned low, planning the ranch they would build, the life they would make. Ross found his land in a valley south of Helena, a section along a creek with good grass and timber. The previous owner had started building a cabin but never finished, so they had a foundation to work with at least. Ross sent word to Jimmy Macklin's widow in St. Louis, telling her about the trial, about the justice they had finally won, and offering to split the ranch with her if she wanted to come west. She wrote back thanking him but declining, saying she was settled now with her family, but please would he name something after Jimmy so his daughter would know he had not been forgotten. Ross named the creek Macklin Creek, and Hannah thought that was fitting. They worked hard that first year, finishing the cabin and adding a barn, buying cattle and chickens and putting up fences. It was brutal work, and Hannah's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned from hours in the sun, but she had never been happier. At night, she would collapse into bed beside Ross, exhausted and sore, and he would hold her and they would marvel at what they were building together. The following spring Hannah realized she was pregnant, and Ross was so careful with her after that, treating her like she might break even though she was stronger than ever. Their son was born in February of 1880 during a snowstorm, with Ross delivering the baby himself because the doctor could not make it through the drifts. They named him Samuel James, for Hannah's brother and Ross's friend, and when Ross placed the baby in Hannah's arms, she saw tears in his eyes. Life settled into a rhythm after that, the hard, satisfying work of raising a ranch and a child. Samuel grew strong and curious, and when he was 3, Hannah started teaching him his letters, thinking about someday opening a school for the scattered ranch families in the area. Ross proved to be a patient, devoted father, teaching Samuel to ride almost as soon as he could walk, showing him how to rope and care for the animals. 3 years after Samuel was born, Hannah gave birth to twin girls, Rose and Alina, and the cabin felt suddenly very small and very full of life. They built an addition, 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and planted an orchard and vegetable garden that Hannah tended with fierce pride. The ranch prospered, their herd growing year by year, and other families moved into the valley, drawn by the good land and the community forming there. Hannah did eventually start a school, teaching in the front room of their cabin until they could build a proper schoolhouse. She had a dozen students, including her own children, and she loved every minute of it, the feeling of shaping young minds, of building something that would outlast her. Ross became a respected voice in the growing territory, serving on the Cattlemen's Association, and eventually as a territorial legislator when Montana moved toward statehood. He never forgot where he came from, though, never forgot the struggle for justice that had brought him and Hannah together. He fought for laws protecting small ranchers and miners, for fair courts and honest sheriffs, and when Montana finally became a state in 1889, he was there to witness it. The Kincaid brothers had been hanged in the fall of 1878, their execution attended by dozens of people they had wronged. Hannah had not gone to watch, having no desire to see death even of men who deserved it. Ross had gone, though, standing witness for Jimmy Macklin, and when he came home he had held Hannah tight and said simply, "It is done. We can let it go now." And they did let it go, not forgetting but no longer letting the past define them. The ranch was their present and their future, the children their legacy. Samuel grew up to be a surveyor like his uncle, honest and meticulous in his work. Rose married a doctor and moved to Helena, while Alina stayed on the ranch, marrying a neighboring rancher's son and building her own spread in an adjoining valley. Hannah and Ross grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But they never lost the closeness that had been forged in those desperate days fleeing across the desert, never forgot the moment when Ross had found her digging in the place they meant to kill her and had said, "You are coming with me right now." Those words had changed everything, had set them both on a path neither could have imagined. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the large house the original cabin had become, Ross took Hannah's hand and led her outside to watch the sunset over the mountains. The valley spread below them, golden with late summer wheat, and Hannah could see the schoolhouse she had founded, now run by a younger teacher but still serving the community. "Did you ever imagine this?" Ross asked, gesturing at the vista at the life they had built. "That day when I found you, did you think we would end up here?" Hannah leaned against his shoulder, still fitting perfectly after all these years. "I could not imagine past the next hour, let alone 40 years. But I am glad we made it, Ross. I am glad you rode up when you did." "Best decision I ever made," Ross said, kissing the top of her head. "Taking you with me." They stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire, two people who had been strangers brought together by violence and fear, who had chosen each other and built something beautiful out of pain. The West was still wild in places, still hard and unforgiving, but here in this valley they had made a home, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. And when the stars came out, one by one, Hannah thought of Samuel and Jimmy Macklin and all the others whose sacrifice had paved the way for this peace, this happiness. She thought they would approve of what she and Ross had made of the chance they had been given, of the way they had turned near death into a lifetime of love. Ross must have been thinking the same thing, because he squeezed her hand and said quietly, "We made it count, Hannah. Everything they went through, everything we survived, we made it mean something." "We did," Hannah agreed. And standing there under the vast Montana sky, held safe in the arms of the man who had saved her life, and then spent 40 years proving that love was real and lasting and worth every hardship, she knew it was true. They had made it count, had built joy from sorrow, had found in each other the home they had both been searching for. The valley grew dark around them, lights beginning to glow in the windows of their children's homes scattered across the hillsides. Inside their own house they could hear laughter, the voices of grandchildren playing, the warm sounds of family. But for now they stood outside, just the two of them, remembering how it had all begun. With blood on her hands and death at her heels, with a stranger on a horse and a desperate choice, with words that would echo through 4 decades. "You are coming with me right now." Words that had led to this, to everything, to a love that had endured and would endure until the last star faded from the sky.